Okay, so our next task here is to delete an element from the list. So we saw that we were able, by using the toString method, by overriding the toString method, we were able to get a nice display of the customers that we've entered. So now we want to be able to delete entries. So, by the way, when we have been entering, let's go back to here. When we use the new customer function that we had subroutine that we had created, we added these three customers into our list array, and we also separately add them into the list box. So just to make this point, these are completely separate actions. So adding them into the array list and adding them into the list box are completely separate. You could do one and not the other. So if you go back and check, we did two things. We added them into my customers, where my customers was the array list, and we also added them into LST customers. In other words, we added them into the list box. Those are completely separate. I could just not have this this line here, and I would just be adding them to the array list. They wouldn't be displayed here, but they'd still be in the array list, or vice versa. I could just add them to the list box, but not actually add them to my array list, which is kind of like my database. So these are completely separate actions, first of all. Okay, next, we want to delete. So let's add in this button, call it btn delete, and let's try to achieve the deletion. So in this PowerPoint, the author does this all kind of very formally. It's like when you go out to a big event, you might want to wear special clothes or something like that. He does this all very formally. You don't have to really do it this way. What I mean by doing it formally is he's creating properties and extra methods and so on that you don't actually have to do. But this is kind of a good way to do it, and but it makes it maybe hard the first time through to understand it. So what I'd like you to do first is to take a look at just this line of code here, or I'm sorry, just this line of code here. So what does this do? Well, first of all, LST customers is our list box. And I can ask you, well, how do we know which entry we want to delete? So going maybe to here, let's see, where is it? So going to here maybe, how do we know which one to delete? Well, if nothing is selected, then we don't know which one to delete. So in other words, the user has to tell us which one to delete. And the way they tell us is by selecting one of them and then pressing the delete button. So, so how is it that we can know which one? Programmatically, we can know. In other words, how do we know which one is selected? Well, if you go back to here, what I'd like you to do is make a message box that shows the result of lstcustomers.selectedIndex. And if you do that, so I'll show you that right here actually. So let's put a button here and put this code in here like that. Okay, so I'm going to show LST. I just want to show you how this works. What is this selected index? What does it do? So let's start the program. Let's get some data in there. And now if I, whoops, I forgot to do one thing. Let me fix this. No, I'm sorry, this will work. So if I click this button, what's going to happen? Well, currently nothing is selected, so I'm not really sure what's going to happen, right? We're experimenting with that show index, selected index. So what happens? When nothing is selected, I get a -1 there. Okay, now how about if I select the first one? What do I get? It's 0. What if I show the second one? Select the second one. I get a 1. So what's going on? Remember, we usually count from 0. So this is the 0th one, the first one, the second one. So how does this selected index work? It tells us which item has been selected, and it gives us back that index number. So it gives us 0, gives us 1. If nothing is selected, it gives us -1. So that's what this is, right? So what's he doing here? He's taking that and he's assigning it to an integer. He's creating a new variable called index and assigning that. So here he's reading what has been selected. And then he's storing it in this variable index. Then he says, if index is not equal to -1, in other words, if something has been selected, then return, now this says lstcustomers.items index. So what is this going to return? Well, this index is going to be the index for the element that has been selected. So that's going to go in here, like it might be 0. And then items, so we have items 0 and LST customers. So what is this going to return? And let's just check the else. Else, so if, in other words, if it's -1, then return nothing. Okay, and that's the end if. And the, okay. So, what is this going to do? Now, he's storing all of this in a property, a read-only property called selected customer. That's what I said is kind of formal and not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to do it this way. You could just work with collecting the index of the selected item and just doing this part here. You don't need the return here, you don't need the get and all this other stuff. He's doing it formally. So anyway, so what is going to be returned in this statement though? So play with this yourself and see what kind of thing gets returned. But I'll tell you that what gets returned is whatever kind of thing is stored in our list box. Now, I don't know if you remember, but in our list box, we stored customers. We weren't storing strings. We were storing customers. If we go back to this part where we're adding in, where this is our function that allows us to add in new customers and display them in here, and add them into our array list. This was the part where we add to the LST customers list box, right? And what are we adding? Items.add. Temp is not a string. Temp is not a string. What is temp? Temp is a customer. That means we're not adding a string in here. And that's why we had trouble displaying it. We had to override something, that we had to override the toString methods, so-called toString method. Anyway, that's why we had trouble displaying it, because it wasn't a string. We are adding customers to this list box. So going back to this, we're putting in the index like 0, items, LST customers. In other words, we're getting one of the elements from our LST customers, but they aren't strings. They are customers. So we're returning a customer here. Okay? So that's what gets returned here. So you need to remember that. So selected customer will return a customer. Okay? Now what should we do with this? We've now found the customer that we want to, what? We're doing all this to delete. So we've now found the customer that we want to delete. Now what should we do with it? Well, we should delete it. Well, where are we storing it? We're storing it in two independent places. One is in the array list, which is like our database. And the other is in the list box, which is where we can see what's there. So we're storing it in two separate places. Not sure that's such a good design. This should probably read from the array list, but that's not how we're doing it. We're just adding things into here separately. It's probably better if this actually read from our array list. But anyway, that's not how we're doing it. So, so we want to delete it from two places. So let's see how that's done in the next slide.